collective bargaining in retail and its radio silence on issues such as equal pay, fire and rehire proposals in Scotland's public sector speaks volumes. If government ministers do not speak up, then it will consign the Fair Work principles to utter irrelevance. There can be no more broken promises from our politicians on both sides of the border. The truth is, we simply can't wait on a helping hand from government. As a movement, we need to work out how we can effectively reach and organise in parts of the economy where unions are not recognised and where workers are unorganised. That includes hospitality, the gig economy, and many areas of retail. There are huge challenges, and the ones we've admittedly struggled to grapple with because of the legal framework, which makes it so difficult for us. We need to keep at it and don't fall back on the assumption that the UK or Scottish governments will sort this for us. They never have, and they never will. The winter fuel payment cuts, the failure to support our WASPI women, the failure to support Grangemouth, that list stops here, Congress. Our rights are not negotiable. Support the composite.
Thank you, Tony. Can I now call on the CWU to second the composite motion? Thanks, colleague.
Chair Congress, Craig Anderson, on behalf of the CWU, proudly seconding Composite A. In seconding Composite A, the CWU believes, as trade unions renegotiate agreements with employers to reflect changing circumstances, the Fair Work Convention must also evolve to build on the New Deal. This year marks the 10th anniversary of the Scottish Fair Work Framework. The world of work has undergone significant transformation. This includes the UK's departure from the EU, a new UK government which is committed to a new deal for working people, the workplace changing with the rise of the gig economy, the adoption of automisation, artificial intelligence and the impact of 15 years of austerity. The core budget for union learning has not risen to reflect these rising costs. Conference, we call upon the Scottish Government to establish a new framework for engagement with unions, aiming to develop a new deal for trade unions in Scotland. We urge the Scottish Government and all political parties ahead of the 2026 elections to review and negotiate the Fair Work Framework to ensure it secures the expansion of employment rights in Scotland, adequately addresses the challenges of the gig economy, automisation and AI, and provides robust protection and workers' rights in the context of these changes. It extends beyond the principles of the New Deal for working people to further enhance the protection for workers. And finally, we want security above inflation investment within Scottish union learning. To advocate for a renewed partnership between the Scottish Government, unions and employers in ensuring workplaces are fair, inclusive for the future, and that's what these discussions must undertake. To campaign for increased union involvement in policy making on issues such as automisation, digitalisation and AI, ensuring that these benefit workers and do not undermine the job security or conditions that we currently have. Conference, I second.
Thank you, Craig. I now call on the Scottish Artists Union to speak in support of the composite motion.
President, Congress, Tamara Rogovic on behalf of the Scottish Artists Union, first-time speaker. Speaking in support of Composite A, Congress, it appears that the original aims of the 1976 Trade Union Certification Office were to protect the integrity and democracy of trade unions. However, in 2016, the malicious amendments to the Trade Union Act were designed to undermine these principles and to reduce democratic engagement and the morale of trade union members. The Act included the introduction of a levy and extended the powers of the certification officer to hand out massive fines and allow anti-union third parties to make complaints. The calculation of the levy also seems arbitrary. They appear to punish smaller trade unions that have been successful at fundraising, including ring-fenced SUL grants. The certification officer's report also seemed contradictory. They said that they had saved us money, yet they lowered the threshold for the levy categories so that smaller unions would have to pay the highest levy. For example, a union the size of SAU with 2,600 members is now paying the same levy as the biggest unions, a levy of over £6,000, which is a huge amount of money for any union, especially a smaller one. In addition, it is a disgrace that in a 21st century, unions are still expected to use paper ballots. We need electronic balloting now. It will increase democratic engagement and reduce the financial cost and the environmental impact. Please support this motion.
Thank you, colleague. I now call on the RMT to speak in support of the composite motion.
Thank you. Delegates, there are positives in the New Deal, but I have to tell you, we could have another P&O in 2 weeks' time under the terms of this one. What we've got is 40 years of declining living standards in this country. All of our national assets, all of our public services, all of our industry has been offshored, outsourced, privatised. Living standards now are at a perilous state. If you went out to work 40 years ago, you could afford to buy a house. You could afford to have a fairly decent standard of living. You've gone to work in a trade union organised industry. You would have been part of the social clubs, athletic clubs, sporting clubs, community, fundraising, all of it part of the trade union movement. What neoliberalism and globalisation has delivered over 40 years is a massive shift of wealth to a global elite. It's left communities destroyed across Britain and people in working class communities living in a state of chaos and insecurity. And that's the backdrop and alienation to the rise of the populist right in Britain. They didn't create that alienation, but they're exploiting it. And what we need to do, if we're going to have any relevance in 2 decades from now as a movement, is we need to put the trade unions back into those communities, because it's us that build community. It's us that bring people together and bring unity. So we must have sectoral collective bargaining. Otherwise, we are going to end as a movement in the not too distant future. We must have the right to take solidarity strike action. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to build the communities that we need. We must have a strategic role for the state and an organised economy that invests in our industry, in our housing, and builds the country back up again. And none of these things are going to come about unless the trade union movement unites and gets behind those demands. And I've got to tell you, we can moan about the politicians and what they've left out of the bill till the cows come home. But the simple fact is this: in our own movement, people are prepared to prioritise their own sectional interests and let go of some of these key, important parts of that bill. And I'm telling you now, if you want to have any future as a trade union and labour movement, then you better get behind what I'm saying. We must have sectoral bargaining. We must put the trade unions back in the community. That is how we're going to build things up. That is how we're going to defeat the populist right. For 40 years, neoliberal economic policy in Britain has been supported by much of the labour movement, and it's no surprise then that big portions of the working class have lost faith in it. We've got to give people back hope. We've got to bring back unity, and we must bring the trade unions back through sectoral collective bargaining, or we're finished.
Thanks, Eddie. I hope Lillian doesn't shout at me for overrunning slightly with her timings that she's kept so well. But I now call on the NASUWT to speak in support of the composite motion.
Sorry, Chair, Congress, Rod McCready, NASUWT, the Teachers' Union supporting the motion. The NASUWT has welcomed the Employment Rights Bill 2024, which seeks to expand rights for trade unions, including the right to access workplaces, updated conditions for union recognition, protections against blacklisting, and particularly provision for electronic balloting has been described before. And whilst the NASUWT welcomes these provisions, we also believe that further measures are needed to ensure the repeal of the anti-trade union measures in the Trade Union Act 2016, including the scrapping of the arbitrary 6-month time limit on statutory ballot mandates. The last UK government also increased the maximum amounts of damages which would be awarded against trade unions fourfold, at the lowest level of membership from 10,000 to 40,000, and at the highest level of membership from 250,000 to £1 million. These increases are draconian and should also be reversed. Congress, our strength lies in our unity. By supporting this motion, we stand together against injustice and for the fundamental right of working people to organise and take action when necessary. Let's send a powerful message of solidarity. Support the motion.
Thank you, colleague. I now call for any other supporting and opposing speakers.
President, Congress, Mick Dolan, EIS. Prior to the 2024 election, the Labour Party manifesto included the New Deal for Working People, the bill that's currently going through Parliament. In that, they said they wanted to give workers back their voice, to improve their terms and conditions, and ensuring the protections are fit for the world today. They promised to introduce this legislation, which is currently going through, and the motion gives notice we'll hold their feet to the fire on the promises they've made. They promised to repeal the 2016 Trade Union Act, in which a Tory government, which was elected by only 28% of the electorate, made trade unions reach a turnout of 50% and an overall 40% of their membership vote for industrial action before they can exercise their fundamental right to strike. The Labour manifesto promised the end of postal ballots, the introduction of electronic systems. They promised to protect facility time. They promised to ensure that employers had menopause action plans. They promised to deliver safer workplaces. They promised to narrow the gender pay gap. They promised to end 0 hours contracts. They promised to deliver where the Conservatives failed. This Congress now calls on Labour to deliver on those promises and improve the lives of all working people. The motion calls on the STUC Council to engage with the UK Parliament to ensure that we get a strong employment rights bill. The bill that's currently going through, we don't want any wavering. They must keep their promises they made pre-election. Thank you.
Thanks, Mick. Next speaker, please.
Ben Lund from the Musicians Union speaking in support of Composite A. The musicians, for us, precarity and just lack of support and stability has been central to our industry for centuries, and it is no surprise that when the shysters who invented the term gig economy not only took the glitz and glamour of what it means to be gigging, but also the precarity and exploitation that comes with that to inspire those exploitative practices within various other different industries across the world. For our members, we make up about 85% of our members are on self-employed contracts. That is not only the vast majority, but it's to a point where the vast majority of them do not have the choice to have any other form. In Scotland, for say a classical musician, there are only 5 organisations that hire them for a potential of an actual salaried position, and even then, they are the lowest paid in Britain. These are the problems that we have within our particular sector and the desperate need for the new bill for workers to extend even further. Make sure that we remember that actually, even though we are artists, we are workers too. We cannot pay our rent on lovely things like inspiration or on exposure or on Instagram likes or various other different things like that. We pay our rent through decent conditions, through decent protections, and remembering that workers' rights are what keeps us in our jobs and keeps us sustained for a long time to come. Support the Composite. Thank you very much, their comrades.
Thanks, Ben. Call the next speaker, please.
Vice President, Congress, Stuart Graham, Unison Scotland, speaking in support of Comp A. I suppose lots been said by previous speakers, but I want to address some of the gaps in the bill. The Institute for Employment Rights stated in a press release last month that, as Eddie said, the bill leaves fire and hire open. So the very workers that it's actually claiming to protect, it doesn't. Why is that? Because the bill allows dismissals under likely financial difficulties, but it doesn't actually provide a clear legal definition of what that is. So that would basically allow a business or an organisation to continue, whatever he said, he made a reference to another P&O, do exactly that, because they don't have to prove to an independent financial auditor what those are. So we require meaningful penalties, we require tighter legal definitions, and we require a properly resourced monitoring, compliance and enforcement regime. I want to compare that a wee bit to Fair Work as well, because let's face it, Fair Work is a bit of a sticker. See if people, certainly within Glasgow, whenever we see how that's applied through a tendering process, it's all about self-declaration. There is no enforcement regime or monitoring regime around that. So there's a clear dichotomy between the rhetoric that we hear from both the UK and the Scottish Government and action that we can actually take around that. All they've been consistent with is procrastination and prevarication on the issue. It's about how we use the provisions in the Employment Bill. It's about the scaffolding that we can provide around that. We need to be able to empower the legal teams within our own unions, because they're so risk averse at times, to actually take on some of the more difficult and complex tasks. Something along the lines of, suggest for quite some time the ideas of trade disputes to fight public sector cuts. Workforce is going down, the demand goes up, we don't get any more money. I think we could explore that as a trade dispute, not just within Unison, but as a movement to start to get back up, back fighting, to actually be able to use legislation to combat. So please support this composite. Thank you.
Thanks, Stuart. That was Composite A, building on the New Deal. Please note the General Council recommends support. I will now go to the vote. All those in favour? All those against? Any abstentions? Composite A, building on the New Deal, is carried. Move to